this thing of like showing Aish rabbis, because I got a whole list of them, and I mean, this is not all, but I have, you're in here as like the nerd rabbi, which is like, wait, what? Wait, can you oppose that? That's like the most logical, like,
that's fine.
Go through. So you could like, look here, I got like the hippie rabbi, Serbic rabbi.
Who's the hippie rabbi?
Yeah, and then
Most of your real hippie.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like it's just like the origins of their stories. So it's like, because you came over here being very analytical. Yeah, what made you consider Judaism to actually take it seriously or look into it?
So first of all, I was always Jewish. I was born Jewish. I either won or lost the genetic lottery, right? In that sense, now I think I won it. But back in the day, I wasn't so sure. Proud Jew. I think the key moment for me was when I realized just how ignorant I am to my own Judaism, right? So I thought of myself as a well-traveled, cosmopolitan, well-read, college-educated intellectual. And then when I came to Israel and I started taking some classes here at Aish, the essentials classes back in the day, this is the summer of 2011, I realized I don't really have a basis for many of the conclusions that I drew about spirituality, God's existence, Judaism, the relevance of it all. I thought that religion was really a negative force in the world and responsible for much of the hate and violence and destruction in the world. And then I realized that it's not accurate. It's not inaccurate. It's just that anything that contributed to my worldview was a perversion of what the actual Torah taught. And if Torah would be applied carefully and properly by responsible, well thought out leaders, then the world would be a much better place. So I thought to myself, well, if one of my goals as a idealistic, liberal back in the day was to make the world a better, safer, more loving, more prosperous place, then maybe Judaism, which has been around for thousands of years against all odds, maybe there is something to be learned here to apply to every other area of my life. And so that's what got me to start taking it more seriously and learning. And then eventually I got into philosophical and cosmological and mathematical and neuroscience evidence for the existence of consciousness, right? And God, a creator, infinite creator, sustainer of the universe, design of the universe, talking about genetics and evolution became a much more nuanced conversation than is that Iran? Not yet. So yeah, once the conversation became more nuanced, then I realized I have a lot to learn. And I thought that the rabbis here and the presenters and the speakers were very articulate and well thought out, and they weren't some kind of like a caricature of an Orthodox xenophobic, ignorant Jew that I once thought that an Orthodox rabbi living in Jerusalem would be. So I humbled myself and I said, maybe there's something to learn here. And slowly, as I learned more, so I took it more and more seriously.
Oh, how long was that period of learning?
So there was about a month of deep diving into God's existence and evidence of the soul's existence. After a month, I left Israel, going back to the States, trying to pretend like none of this ever happened, because it created a real existential crisis within me. Once I realized that I think that there's an overwhelming case to be made for existence of God and the soul, free will, that means that we were created for a purpose. And the question becomes, okay, so what's the purpose for which we were created? And that's really what almost every religion, posits itself to be, is that revelation or that divine communication of God or the gods, for what we're meant to be doing in this world and how do we accomplish the best life. So Judaism is that. So why don't I start with Judaism and then actually start investigating whether it's true, whether it holds water, whether it's possible, that it could be true to its own claims of divinity. So I took a break for about a month of just, enjoying my summer after college graduation. And then I decided to come back here and figure out if Judaism is legit. Right now that I know that God and the soul is legit, spirituality is real, and the metaphysical world is existing, then the question becomes, okay, is there a way to navigate it? Is there an ancient tradition? Do we have something, some insights? And so that's what Torah claims to be. So then I started examining whether Torah could be divine. Started learning it inside. Started learning Hebrew, Aramaic, and so I think probably after about 6 months of deep diving into Torah, I was like pretty much convinced that it's legit. But that was 24 hours a day basically. Even in my sleep, I'm sleeping here in Jerusalem. It's 24/7.
And that was in Aish.
I was here at Aish.
Yeah. And then so there's 6 months convinced, and then you just stayed after that.
Mm-hmm. Left to go get the rest of my stuff and check in with family and make sure that they know that I'm not crazy. I just see the world a little bit differently. And interestingly enough, my parents, they weren't going to let me go without a fight. So they pressed me and challenged me on a lot of the things that I was saying and my newfound beliefs. And interestingly enough, at least my family that I was living with, my mother and my stepfather, they themselves started looking deeper into it. And first, my stepfather started going to Chabad to learn for Shabbat services. Eventually became for full Shabbats. My mother made the kitchen kosher. They started doing Shabbat at home. They took my little sister out of public school and put her for junior high school into a Orthodox day school. So they embraced it because the answers that I gave them, or at least the path that I set them on, made sense. It was worth investigating. It was definitely a more palatable alternative to just the conclusion that I had gone crazy. So they rolled with it, and I mean, their life has been completely transformed, and I think for the better. So it was definitely difficult on their part. My father and my stepmother, my little brother, did not embrace it personally for themselves, but they respect me for it now. They love my kids, their grandkids, their nephews and nieces, and there's a deep respect in the family for my path, whereas originally there was a lot of antagonism. But I understand the antagonism. It comes from a place of not so much fear, but when you love someone, you want to make sure that they're not being taken advantage of, and that they're living a well thought out life, and that they're going to be happy and they're acting responsibly. So when you don't know something about a certain path, and the people that you do know, the few that you've been introduced to or exposed to, are not balanced people, then you could worry, for your loved one, for your friend, for your family member. But once they met my rabbis and they saw that they're very balanced people, they're normal, and they're well read, and they're educated, and they're with it, and they're emotionally mature and in touch. So they saw that was going to be a path for me too. So, and at that point, by the way, I was not planning on being a rabbi. I was just planning on becoming literate in my Judaism. The idea that I myself would become an educator of Torah only came way later on. I would say about 3 years into my time here at Aish, I started thinking, hey, I like this. I can articulate these ideas, and when I learn, in order to teach, I learn better. And I think that the world needs more educators that can, speak to young, unaffiliated men and women. Maybe I could be that person for some people. So that's when I started learning to be a rabbi and eventually an educator, full-time rabbi. I once gave a talk and someone asked me, "Are you a full-time rabbi?" I said, "Full-time rabbi. Even when I'm playing ping pong and playing basketball, I'm a rabbi."
Oh, that's cool. Again, on the start of the journey, how did you end up at Essentials?
Yeah, so I was on campus representing Israel. In 2008, I went on a birthright trip, and during my birthright trip, the first war in Gaza broke out. It's called, they didn't call it a war, they called it an operation. Oferet Mitzukah, I think it's called. Operation Cast Lead. That's what it's translated to. And that was the first time, I think, that IDF sent foot soldiers into Gaza after giving it away in 2005 to quell rocket fire. After newly elected Hamas had taken power, they started firing rockets. This is before the Iron Dome, so all the rockets were landing. Pretty terrifying situation. And they went in, and it was a really bad situation for the IDF. Eventually, they were successful at quelling the rocket fire, but it came at a great loss, and it was basically like an ambush. Anyway, I just remember being here during that operation as a college sophomore, probably, and experiencing that, from the sidelines. And when I went back to the States, that's when all the SJP groups, Students for Justice in Palestine, that they all started in America on campus as a result of that war, because Israel, of course, was accused of having committed war crimes during that war. The source, of course, was the Associated Press, which was in the same building as the Hamas headquarters. So Hamas is essentially the source for the claims of war crimes and that. And I'll just tell you, interestingly, I think at that time, the UN was passing all kinds of resolutions against Israel because they used phosphorus gas. If you look at any conflict in an urban zone, every single army uses phosphorus gas because it masks, it creates these big clouds of like white smoke, and it masks helicopters flying in and out for medical evacuations or for bringing troops to a new area, and it stops RPGs from having good accuracy to hit the helicopters. But they claim that we fired phosphorus gas into residential homes and basically gassed the Gazans, which never happened. Nobody uses phosphorus gas that way. It's a crazy thing to do, and there's no evidence of it. So I just remember that the report in the UN was rescinded because they realized it came from faulty sources, but the news cycle didn't pick up on that because they already reported Israelis gas Gazan babies in their sleep, so they didn't want to say, "Oh, that was false." They just didn't report the rescinding of the report, and that's when I realized, wow, the world is really not fair. There's a double standard, and I interpreted that as anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism even back then. So I started an organization on campus to bring all kinds of think tank leaders and politicians and policymakers and ambassadors and diplomats to speak on campus. So people came to campus, and we raised funds, and we got funds from the student programming office, and we opened up an organization called Eagles for Israel. And as a result of opening up the organization, so we were meeting all kinds of Jews from around the Boston area. I was in school at Boston College, and slowly but surely, I met a student of Rabbi Noah Weinberg called Rabbi Hanano Wiener Shlita, and he started inviting us to his house for Shabbat dinners. And eventually, started learning with him a little bit, picking his brain about, the political situation at first, but then more religious topics. And he's the one who suggested that I should come to Israel after I graduate. And he convinced me, because he said to me that I seemed so sure of myself. And if I really thought about what my conclusions were based on, should I really be so confident? And my answer truly was no. I'm not so well read in this area. So he said, just go take some classes and learn some more, and come back and do whatever you wanted to do. Just do it a little bit more Jewish. That was his pitch. And then after I experienced that first month, I realized if I could spend 4 years learning how to maximize profits and minimize costs in college, and ironically I put myself into debt doing so, bad business decision number one, right? Going to college. So I said that maybe I could spend 4 months, not years, learning about Torah, Judaism from inside the Torah, getting those skills of literacy, and I could spend those 4 months. So I got I was going to work for a company and in Newark, New Jersey, a financial company, and I asked them, can I start in January instead of September? So they said, yeah. So I said, great. So I had September, October, November, and December to be in Israel and to learn with guaranteed, job with a nice starting salary. But I never went. I emailed them in December saying, I need more time. They said, okay, we can't promise you the position will be available for you. You can always reapply. But I never did that either.
Well, again, last question. What about someone that's like new to Judaism or curious about it? What would you say to them, like to come here or like come there?
Yeah, I don't think they necessarily have to come here to Jerusalem. I definitely think that you're not called a scientist unless you spent a considerable amount of time in the laboratory, right? Meaning, let's say I'm a person who reads every single peer-reviewed scientific journal, and I do that for 10 years, every article, right? And I read it thoroughly. Am I a scientist? No. I'm an avid reader of scientific literature. I definitely know more about science than the average person, but I'm not a scientist because I've never been in a laboratory. I've never done the experiments, right? I've never been there actually interpreting the data for myself and forming hypotheses and making the discoveries. So I'm not a scientist. So you can certainly in this day and age learn a lot about Judaism from podcasts and books in English, going to classes, at different Olami, affiliated young professional centers on college campuses, whatever the case is. But will that make you someone who's a theologian, knowledgeable truly in the actual texts? No, because if you never study the actual text inside for yourself, so you are illiterate in your own tradition. And I just feel like people nowadays are so open-minded about so many different cultures and tribal peoples and histories and minorities, but when they're Jewish and they look at their own history, they don't really know it. We have 3,000 plus years of history that most Jews are oblivious to. For instance, I didn't even know what the temple was. The temple existed, that it was a part of history, that we had 800 years of sovereignty here in the land, and we had thousands of years of history here in the region. I didn't know that. So that was never taught to me. It's crazy, right? You don't know about major, Jewish political leaders and events and the fact that we're in exile. What does that mean? The word diaspora, we use the word diaspora. It's a Greek word referring to those in exile, right? Exile from what? That was never spoken about. So, I just feel like, what I would say to the average person out there who's curious, interested, spiritual, but has never been to yeshiva or seminary is that they deserve to be literate in their own tradition, right? We talk about birthright. Birthright doesn't just mean it's your birthright to come to the land of Israel and, party in Tel Aviv for a few days and, ride on some camels and, visit the Knesset. That's nice. But the real birthright of the Jewish people is the Torah, because, for thousands of years, we haven't had much in common. We haven't had a common language. We haven't had a common culture. We haven't had even a common homeland, really. We've been living all over the place with different cultures, different ways of looking at the world. Judaism is not really a religion, because you can be totally irreligious and be 100% Jewish, right? It's not a race. You can be a black Jew, a Chinese Jew, a Hindu Jew. Not a Hindu Jew. You can be from the Indian Peninsula or from the Hindu Peninsula, and you can be 100% Jewish. So it has nothing to do with a race. It has nothing to do with religion. And so what's the only thing that's been the common thread between all Jewish communities all around the world for thousands of years? The Torah. It's always the same Torah. So if you don't know the Torah, then you don't really understand the very thing that has been connecting the Jewish people for thousands of years in exile. So then that means that you're clueless about the core of our identity as a people. So if you're curious about Judaism, you're curious about spirituality, it must lead to Torah, real Torah learning. Otherwise, it's not really grounded in anything that is real.
Okay, is there a book you'd recommend that, so do they dive straight into the Torah, or is there a favorite first go-to book they should read to start this journey?
Oh man, there's so many great books out there nowadays. I don't know of one particular book that I could recommend. But for me, for instance, one of my big issues was the seeming contradiction between science and Torah. And so I would recommend a book called The 6 Days of Cosmology and Evolution, that goes verse by verse through the first 2 chapters of Genesis. Talks about the creation of the universe, of time and space, of the cosmos, of this planet, of life forms on Earth. And it goes through some of the latest research scientifically, and how it seems to jive very well with the verses explicitly, and also with the rabbinic commentaries from thousands of years ago that speak about ideas that we're only discovering to be true nowadays, in no ambiguous terms. That's one book I would recommend. And as a greater overarching picture of Judaism and Jewish history, I recommend Rabbi Ken Spiro's A Crash Course in Jewish History. That's the first Jewish book that I ever read in my life, and it was amazing. It's basically like it's a cheat code to reading the whole Torah and much of the Tanakh as well. It takes you from Adam and Rishon, from Adam and Eve, all the way to the modern state of Israel. So I recommend that book.
Oh, okay, amazing. All right, thank you so much. This